Okay, so one thing I'm super curious about, now that remote working seems like it may well continue, is whether employers will look at skills differently. Will the likes of independent working or self-motivation become prized more, alongside things like managing up? And will final round interviews become more about testing whether candidates can be managed remotely? I wanted to learn more, and so I reached out to two recruitment and people development specialists, Lindsey Rowe, Chief of Staff, COO, and Head of People and Programs at global software specialist SAP, and Michelle Ruddle, Recruitment Marketing Manager at leading international law firm Hogan Lovells. I first asked Lindsey if the rise in remote working was making her potentially look differently at certain skills, and if so, which might become even more important.
I think for all of our recruitment, not even just for students, we need to make sure that the people that join our organisation do have those skills. When I say growth mindset, people say that all the time. What we really mean by that is we actually don't want the finished article when people are applying. So a lot of the time people think, I'll say that I can do everything and I can do it to the best of my abilities and I'm the real deal. But actually, we want people that say, I just would love to learn that. So that's one of the skills or the personality traits that we're looking for. And just being really authentic, because everything else, there'll be a way that we can coach it, train it. I think in the past, people thought about like time management and communication skills, those sorts of things. But we tend to see that comes as pretty natural to most people now. Managing up is an interesting one. The ISE had that as one of the highest. They did a skills analysis, what employers are looking for in graduates. It was one of the higher ones. And when we presented it to our students, they said, well, how do I do that? And it's a case of, it's not really managing up, it's good communication. I love it. Like my current intern, she manages up really, really well. And it's, keeping me abreast of things, helping me manage her rather than me worrying about her all the time. Hey, we're working on this today, we're doing that, I need some help here. That's what employers and in managers in particular are looking for.
So really interesting from Lindsey, who is seeing a subtle shift not only in skills, but also in personality traits, prizing the ability to manage up, as well as those showing a growth mindset. And connected to this point from Lindsey is wanting candidates who are coachable and adaptable. So be prepared to show you love to learn using a variety of sources with practical examples. Next, I asked Michelle from Hogan Lovells if the rise in remote working was potentially making her view certain skills differently.
I mean, I would say certainly, being somebody who is able to manage upwards. So just from speaking with some of our trainees at the moment, so I'm a buddy to one of our second seat trainees. So I have a sort of a 15-minute catch-up call with her each week just to kind of sense check and see how she's getting on. And one of the themes actually that has been coming up quite a lot on that one is, how do you come across as you're managing upwards to colleagues? You're responding to queries, try and have phone calls with colleagues if you can to cover points off that they might be concerned about in emails. I think it's certainly trying to replicate those things as a student as well as if you were applying to opportunities.
It's really interesting that Michelle also talks about the virtues of managing up well. Next up, I asked Michelle whether they might test for those skills that might be more prized under remote working at the graduate recruitment stage.
Not necessarily, which you may be surprised by, but what I would say is we would still encourage students to treat kind of the virtual experience, whether or not they're having an interview, they're attending an event, they might be sitting on a webinar or a panel discussion or a presentation, whatever it may be. We would still encourage them to engage in the same sort of way. I would also say it's quite tricky with a virtual scenario to kind of read non-verbal cues. So say if you were part of a group exercise, for example, for an assessment day, which we do have as part of our training contract assessment days, you may not necessarily be able to read the room as you normally would do. So I would suggest just giving time for other people in your group to answer questions. If people are slightly quieter, try and bring them into conversations. Again, you're trying to build rapport even though you may not necessarily be there in person. We are looking for you to try and enhance even more the personal skills that you would try and get across if you're meeting people in person.
So enhancing communication skills is a real key asset here for Michelle, and specifically in online group assessments, that might include the likes of ensuring you're bringing other candidates into the discussion if you're noticing they're quiet, giving verbal and non-verbal affirmation for ideas being shared, while being respectful of people's airtime, and inviting comments and questions explicitly if you're sharing your ideas with a group. What Lindsey and Michelle have shown is that talented graduate recruiters as well as line managers are acutely aware of the need to manage new recruits remotely. So maybe it is reasonable to expect those final stage interviews to be a little more focused on testing precisely those attributes that might make you a good remote worker. Now, what does this mean for interview preparation? I'd maybe look to anticipate and practice for questions including, how do you feel about working remotely the majority of time? How do you motivate yourself? Describe a time you've managed a relationship online. Using resources like this to understand what good managing up looks like to support and structure your answers. Seeing such questions as a real opportunity to stand out from other candidates. I want to say a huge thank you to our two guests this week, Michelle and Lindsey from Hogan Lovells and SAP respectively. And if you've enjoyed getting their insights, I hope you'll be glad to hear that we'll be seeing a lot more of Michelle and Lindsey over coming episodes of CareersLab, so be sure to subscribe and hit the notifications icon to not miss out. Now in a few weeks' time, I'll also be publishing a Q&A episode, and I'd love to feature your careers questions in that. So if you'd like your question to feature, please email me at careers.marketing@ucl.ac.uk. That's it from me for this week. I'll see you next time.